Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining me for Friday Book Bites this week. Sorry we're a couple of minutes late, but we had some technical issues. It's handy when we've got some hubbies working from home to help us with that. I am very excited today to have joining me Tabitha Bird, and I'm just going to bring her into the stream right now. Hi, Tab, how are you?
I'm great, and it's good to be here finally.
That's right, we got there in the end, and that's what matters, right?
Exactly.
And we've learned something. So if you learn something, then it's all okay, right?
Exactly. Learning curve.
That's right. I've been on a huge one of those ever since lockdown came into being, and we've all had to move online and learn all of this new technology. My learning curve has gone through the roof.
I know. I don't know if my learning curve's gone through the roof or my ability to speed dial my husband's gone through the roof, but
If that helps. My husband's a computer engineer, and so while having him work from home has been really annoying because he's on the phone all day, it's been very handy for moments like this.
exactly. Thank you for having me here, Sandy. It's a pleasure to be here.
That's okay. So Tabitha and I are going to talk today about pain and how we write pain. But before we do that, I am going to pop up our giveaway just so that we can see what it is. And I just need to click the right buttons. There we go. So if you leave a comment or ask a question either during today's live stream, or if you're watching it back later until midnight, Saturday night, Sydney time, you will be in the draw to win a copy of The Cottage at Rosella Cove, a copy of A Lifetime of Impossible Days, both of those in B format, and some chocolates. So get commenting and ask Tabitha and I lots and lots of questions. All right, so let's get into it, Tab.
Yeah.
Both of us write pain in our novels, but we come at it from a very different angle, I think. And I wanted to ask you why you think it's important that we explore pain in its different ways through our writing.
I think it's really important because there is no one story of pain. I think as many people as live on this earth have experience with pain and with trauma and all the various different shades thereof. And I think it's important to have many different stories so that we don't just have one very narrow view of what it means to be human, because being human is a rather beautiful, messy state. And that's what stories are supposed to be. They're supposed to be a reflection of that beautiful, messy state. So I think that's why it's important to have lots of different versions thereof.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it is messy. And I agree with you totally. I think that we need to have these stories told, you know, from those raw, gritty, hard-hitting memoirs to the women's fiction that I write, where pain is a part of the story, but it's not the driving force necessarily, and to stories like yours where pain is very much at the forefront of the story, because you're right, we all experience it in different ways, and as many ways as we can tell that story, we open up people's eyes to it. One thing we do have in common, even though we both approach trauma and pain and heartache in very different ways in our stories, is I feel we both end up with quite uplifting books at the end of the day. I wanted to ask you why that's important as well.
Yeah, that's a really big question. I think when I first started to write A Lifetime of Impossible Days, I was much more focused on the pain of the character's story and perhaps mining my own experience and putting it in there. But I had a lot of early feedback on it that whilst it was beautifully written and important, and the things that were happening in the story were important to be told, readers need to see hope, I think. And I think also that well, in my story anyway, I'm not going to say that's true for maybe every single story, but in my story, I thought it was really important that readers should see hope and should see that pain isn't the end of the story, that it's a part of the story and perhaps something that we'll always have the scars of, but it doesn't have to be the full stop. It doesn't have to be the destination of where someone is heading. That if someone has experienced that in their life, it can be transformed. And I really like that saying, beauty for ashes. And I think that is exactly what I was trying to show in my story, that whilst some stuff can happen in the past that's not good, it can be transformed, and there's lots of hope and there's lots of light. And even something maybe more beautiful that wouldn't have happened if the pain wasn't there, perhaps.
Yeah, that's a really hard concept to grasp, isn't it? When you go through something that's either really painful or really traumatic, that there might be something better at the other end of it. And I think the thing that I have struggled with in my personal life, I share something in common with my character from the Kookaburra Creek Cafe. And I won't go into spoilers in case people haven't read our books. But Alice's journey in that is similar to mine in certain ways. And I think it's really hard when you go through something that's quite extraordinarily painful, balancing that with, well, maybe my life is actually better afterwards. And it kind of feels like you're cheating yourself, I think, out of what happened with that pain. And as a human and as a writer, I think that's a really interesting thing to try to wrap your head around.
It is. And I think you don't want to introduce that concept too early either. I know, so both in my own personal story and in my writing, I think there's a period of time where the focus really needs to be about what has happened and not the silver lining. I think it's really important to explore the messiness of that and sit with that for a while. And I think the way in which I tried to say that there was hope without necessarily presenting a silver lining too early on was really just the magical side of my novel. So I'm quite obsessed. If you've read A Lifetime of Impossible Days, you'll know I'm quite obsessed with magical realism, which means it's not full-on fantasy, but there's that otherworldliness in the book. And that the magic of the ocean in my particular novel turning up, and the beauty of that and the beauty of play and the beauty of imagination is how I held the lightness so that the darkness wasn't overshadowing the story. And also because I do think that pain is quite precious in a way. Like the things that we've gone through, they make us who we are, and they're quite they are quite precious. They really are things that we hold near and dear, and it takes some time to work through that before characters are ready to let go. And I know definitely before I was ready to let go, and to move into what could be a new phase and a new after, where things, like you said, can be better than what they were. I often think of a seed when it's planted in the ground and the darkness that seed would experience, and then that seed literally breaking apart, and that seed maybe in that moment, if we gave that seed a character and a voice, that seed may be thinking everything was over, that it was darkness and it was broken apart and there was nothing there, and then taking some time for that seed to actually shoot and come through the soil, and then for it to see, oh, hang on a minute, there is some light, and for then that seed to grow. So I think that's sort of almost the journey of pain in stories, is that you need to sit with that seed in the darkness for a little while and experience it, and honor it too, I think, and then show the beauty thereafter.
I think, Tabitha, you may have just changed my life. That analogy is beautiful. I love that. The seed is always still part of that flower, and it doesn't diminish the seed's role. It doesn't mean the seed wasn't important. It doesn't mean we've forgotten the seed. Wow. Okay, you've blown my mind.
And without that seed, there is nothing. Without that seed, there is no life. There is no flower. There is no tree. There is no oak. There is nothing. And so in a way, that seed is always precious. And yet we don't want to stay stuck as that seed. We don't want to stay stuck in that brokenness. So yeah, that's kind of where I went with my characters, or at least what I tried to do with my characters.
You definitely did. You definitely did. So as writers then, how do we balance that, recognizing the pain, but giving our characters hope without diminishing the pain? And as you said, without bringing the hope in too early. How do we strike that balance, I guess?
Yeah, it's a really hard one. I think it's about observing the human story. I think it's about writers, I think, need to be students of humanity in a way. We need to watch, we need to be really aware of both our own story and our own lives, but then we need to be almost obsessed with what it means to be human and watching other people's stories and how that plays out. And I think if we do that well, then we can translate some of what that is to the page. We're never going to get it perfect or as beautiful as it is in real life, because you can't translate something so intense and intricate onto a page, no matter how hard you try, which is the big frustration of every writer's attempt. You've got this gorgeous whole thing in your head, and then you're trying to get it on paper, and it's just never quite what you had in mind. But if we are students of the human story and we write it real and we write it authentic, and for me, if we write it vulnerably, so for me, it was really important not to have any BS in there. I really wanted to write the story to be true, to not pretty up things that were not pretty, but also to not romanticize things that I don't think should be romanticized. But to just, I think if writers write from their heart, then it will translate onto the page much better, and readers connect with that. I know that myself, when I'm reading a story, if I read it and I'm like, oh my goodness, like that writer has either experienced that, or they've studied that, or they've just connected with that because I am connecting with their story. And then other times you read a story and you're like, yeah, I just don't buy it. And you just can't, maybe you don't even know what it is you can't buy, but usually it's the vulnerability of the writer and how that translates on the page. My opinion anyway, I could be wrong, but I think that's how it works.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that you talk about, the vulnerability of the writer, because I know that in A Lifetime of Impossible Days, there is an element of your story that runs through the story of the Willers. It's not an autobiography by any stretch of the imagination, but you are drawing from your own experience. And also with my story with Kookaburra Creek, it's not my story, but I am drawing on my story. And I don't know when you sat down to write A Lifetime of Impossible Days, but when I got to that point in my story for the Kookaburra Creek Cafe, I actually stopped writing for about 3 months because I was really scared to go there. Mm-hmm. Did you find that when you started with A Lifetime of Impossible Days?
I'm so glad you brought that up, because actually, not only was I scared to go there, but it was really interesting. When I got my first structural edit letter back from my publisher, which for all readers out there is the letter where the publisher basically says, look, love your book, but here's all the things we think, you could go deeper in, or here's all the things you could explore more. Usually the things that my gorgeous publisher wanted me to explore more were those areas that I did not want to go into. They were those areas that I wanted to just skim right past and just not even notice. And Beverly Cousins is just brilliant. She would pick them up and she would go, here, this point here, the reader needs to know more about this. And I'd be like, no. But she was right. Like, they were the points at which I needed to open more and let the reader in. I needed to just go that little bit deeper. And it doesn't always mean going deeper into your own story, but it means going deeper into that character's story and really seeing what it is that you're hiding. And usually for me anyway, what I'm hiding is something that I don't want to talk about. In the second book as well that I'm currently writing, it's the structural edit is well underway. And the things that Beverly has pointed out have been once again exactly the same. And then there's just little questions that you just go, I don't understand why this character's doing this. And I'm like, well, I do, but I don't want to talk about it.
So how do we go over that? How do we get to that point where we can go there?
I think space is very important. Taking some space from your work, go do something else for a little while. I think writers, even if you're writing full-time, because I am running full-time, I still think you need to be doing something else. Go garden, go visit your friends, go live some life, and let the brain percolate. For me, I think I'm always telling story, but I may not always be sitting in front of the computer. So sometimes my brain just needs to go think, needs to go garden, it needs to go draw, it needs to go paint, whatever, but needs to not word. And then I can get some distance from it. And then and usually something will pop into my head. If that doesn't work, then I have a gorgeous counselor who has been with me for a very long time. Originally started out for a whole different reason, but I still see her because I can drag all sorts of issues into that office, and I typically drag my characters in there because they're usually quite aligned with where I'm at. And we have a good old chat about my characters, which we're not really chatting about, and I will learn something which will then translate into something that I need to express in my writing. So really, there's no one way that you can do that. However works for you as a writer, however you can explore your own inner workings, then do that thing, whatever that may be.
And then having that leap of faith that you are brave enough to do it, I think, is the other thing.
Yes, the leap of faith. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and as you said, readers know whether you're being authentic or not, and knowing that in the back of your head, I think that helps you take that leap of faith.
Exactly. And for me, I kept challenging myself. I kept saying, Tab, is this story that you're writing, is it important enough for you to give it everything you've got? And for me, the answer kept being yes. Yes, it is. And I kept thinking it's not only important for me now as the woman that I am, but it was important for me as a little girl I once was, and all of the places in my life where I didn't have voice. Suddenly I had opportunity to have voice, and I thought to myself, you finally got this platform where someone is willing to publish your voice. Be brave, go there. And I did, and I don't regret going there. It's been the one big thing that readers have commented on over and over and over again, and how things that the Willers have done or places the Willers have journeyed through have meant so much to them. So I don't regret it at all, and I am doing it all over again because I'm writing another book. So,
and did you find it cathartic in some way when you finally got that story on the page?
I think maybe the first time around, because when I first started writing, it was a memoir, and it was nothing like what it is now. And so I was actually encouraged to write, to process what I was thinking, and I had no intentions of writing a book at all. And in that way, it was really cathartic because I had no audience in mind. I was never publishing. In fact, I hadn't even owned the fact that I was a writer. So it was completely cathartic. But when it all changed and I decided that was my story, but it wasn't the story I wanted to tell, I wanted to go further in a way, and I wanted to write a novel, then it was cathartic, but in a different sort of way, because then I was experiencing life through my character's view. And I think that extra degree of separation even taught me more, because I had to put my Willers through a whole bunch of things, and then had to sort it out, had to wreck their lives and then fix their lives, and at least in part. And I learnt so much about myself through those characters. I couldn't believe how much those Willers had to tell me about living life. I was like, sometimes I would just sit there and go, wow, you Willers are really wise. And,
speaking of which, Leanne has made the comment that you sound like a very wise lady. Thank you, Leanne. I absolutely agree with you. As I said a few minutes ago, she's just completely changed my life. I don't need to go to therapy anymore.
I'll bill you for it after, Sandy.
One of the things that I thought was absolutely genius in A Lifetime of Impossible Days was that you never actually tell us what the Willers experience. You never show their trauma on the page. You never describe it. Yet, as a reader, I was in absolutely no doubt what had happened to Willa. And I found that was a stroke of genius, I thought. And I don't know how you did that. Can you explain how you managed to not tell us but completely tell us?
I think it is... for me, when I was writing A Lifetime of Impossible Days, I thought about the Willers' trauma, and I thought two things. There was no point myself. I didn't see any point myself in going back and reliving trauma, which it would have been to write specifically every dit and tattle that had happened. And secondly, I didn't see any benefit of taking a reader's hand and waltzing them through it. I thought really what I wanted to do was show, and I used the younger character, the little girl's character. Through her eyes, we don't see, but we see. And so she doesn't know enough to be able to translate it into words. And that is the beauty and the magic of her character. She doesn't have the words. And no child at that age would. And because she doesn't have the words, I couldn't in any honesty give them to her. Yet I could show enough that as an adult looking back, you would go, there's all of the words she doesn't have, or there's all the things potentially that she is seeing. And she sees in part, as children do. If you speak to any, 4, 5, 6, 8, even 17-year-old, and you ask them what has happened, they will give you a very fragmented story. Are they lying? Absolutely not. But their brain is not fully formed. So the way in which they process the world is incredibly different to the way in which an adult's brain processes the world. And it's why you get the funniest comments from children, but also some of the most insightful comments from children, because they just tell it exactly as it is. So I used the little girl's character and her lack of words, but her innocence and her insightfulness to show enough without showing anything that didn't need to be seen. And I did not want my book to be traumatizing. I wanted it to be hopeful. And there was just no point. I didn't see any value in that at all. It didn't. To me, that wouldn't have added to the story. It would have taken from it. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. As I said, to me, it was a stroke of genius. So it was absolutely the right thing to do. And I was in awe of it when I read it last year. We have a question here from Christy that I'm hoping you might be able to answer. She wants to know how an aspiring writer can approach a potentially touchy subject in an imaginative way.
Good question. I guess I have a couple of answers for that. I think you need to be careful what touchy subject you want to approach. I am a big believer in being careful about what stories you decide are yours to tell. We talk about that a lot when we talk about appropriating stories from people of color, for example, people who have different life, very, very different life experiences from us. I think you also have to be careful when you're choosing a potentially touchy subject. I think you should ask yourself first and foremost why you want to write that, why you believe it's your story to tell, and if you believe that you have what it's going to take to tell that story. So I knew that the Willa story was mine to tell. I had enough experience of that because you can interview 500 people who've experienced that and you still will not get that trauma right on the page. There are some things for which, if we're going to write them, we really have to have lived some of it. So there's that. That's the first point. Secondly, if you have decided, it's mine to tell, I really think this is important, I want to write it, then I think just write it, get that first draft down, and then see what happens when you've written that first draft, because I'm not a planner. Hats off to all the planners out there, but I'm not one. But if you are a planner, you're still going to have a first draft and explore, ask your characters questions and see where you can let your imagination run. For me, magical realism just very naturally bubbled up, and I didn't even know that's what I was writing when I first started writing. It was just there, and it actually took an agent to tell me, "Oh, you're writing magical realism." I was like, "Oh, okay, yep." So I would say play. Don't forget that we start writing because we enjoy it. If you're not enjoying it, there are so many other ways to go and torment yourself in life. Pick one of them. If you don't enjoy writing and love writing, like I said, go bake or sew.
You won't be able to stay the distance, regardless of what it is you're writing.
Exactly. So don't forget, you have an imagination, so go play. Go play with your own mind. Remember what it means to play and put that into your writing, and you will find a way to tell your important, touchy subject story with your imagination, and you'll find a way that puts it together so that it is a story the world has never heard before.
Christy is just clarifying that it is something that she is going through, so she does have personal experience. So I guess then, Christy, Tabitha's advice of play with it write it, play with it, see what happens, and go from there.
Absolutely.
Jodie has a question. Do you have a favourite Willa timeline to write? She loved them all. I loved all of. Well, actually, no, I did love them all. My favourite was probably Silver Willa, but
yeah. Do you know what? I do have a favourite. I think it was Silver Willa in the end. I think she was my favourite in the end, because she was just so sassy. She was such a sassy pants, and she is my lifetime goal. If I end up anything like Willa, I will. I will feel that I have achieved something in life. But I think they all at different times were what I needed. I didn't write that story in a linear fashion. I would jump in and out at different parts of that story. Sometimes I was in the headspace to write that younger character, and so I did. And she was what I needed to write, and so she was my favourite that day. And then on other days, I was ready to sit with Middle Willa and some of the things she was going through, and so I did. But overall, Silver Willa just made me giggle. I know it's really sad, but I would laugh at my own writing. So, yeah, okay, that's embarrassing. But there you go, I did.
Well, now you told us.
But she was fun. She was fun to write. And I also, my heart ached for her and what it might mean to be her age and to not be in control of every facet of your life and to have well-meaning people wanting to move you on to the plastic sheet home. So,
yes. We've got a few people saying that Silver Willa, was their favourite. And the thing that I found really interesting with her, you mentioned young Willa didn't have the words to describe the trauma, and that was a stroke of genius, as I said. Silver Willow's 93, and she is starting to lose some of her faculties. So she's got that layer on top of the pain and the trauma, but she can't quite remember things. She can't quite hold on to things as well. So there's another layer there of seeing the trauma without seeing the trauma.
Exactly. And that kind of came up quite naturally. But once I realized that that was what was happening to Silver Willa, I was like, this is actually perfect, because I don't want it to come through her story either. And really the hero, I suppose they're all heroes in a way, but the person who makes the change in that book obviously is that Middle Willa, who's living in the present. And that wasn't an accident, because I'm a big believer in the fact that it is us in the here and the now that actually make the changes, that actually have the power to impact our future and to take our past and be and use it as something transformative. So when Silver Willa was getting confused and I realized, this is what's happening with her, one, I never named what it was that she was suffering. So you can all guess what that might have been, but I never named it because there's so many things that it could have been. I watched my grandfather go through a very similar process, so I knew what I was talking about and used a lot of those examples. But in a way, Silver Willa still maintains that innocence too. Like, she is innocent within herself as well. So even though sometimes her comments are a bit biting, she's also quite innocent, and she really loves that little girl. And that's something that Middle Willa can't do yet, or in the, without giving anything away, but in the middle of the story, or when we first meet her, she cannot love that little girl. And I needed a character that could. I needed a character that had already grasped that love of who she was when she was younger. So Silver Willa does that as well, which is why I liked her.
Yeah, I guess Middle Willa was too close. She didn't have that distance and that space yet.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. Just popping up a comment here from Donna. We all have stories that we never discuss. That's very true. It's good to read books that touch on some of our own trauma, makes us feel like we're not alone. That is so true, Donna. Absolutely.
Yeah. I totally agree, Donna. It's really important. And I read, every story I could get my hands on with characters that had been through difficult things, or characters at various stages of their lives. And every single time there would be something about those characters that cheered me on. Like, as I was writing, I would often look at my bookcase and think of all those characters and think about all those authors and imagine those little books going, go, you can do it, and be in there and really cheering me on. yeah, so I hope that my book, that would be my greatest honor if my book was to cheer on someone else, or just sit beside them and go, hey, it's not just you. You're
Yeah.
loved, you're amazing, you're enough. Come enter
I
my
think that's the beautiful thing about well, the privilege of what we do. I guess it's a privilege. I think that through our books we can hold somebody else's hand when they're
Yeah.
going through something that's a bit tough. I have had readers write to me and thank me for various parts of the stories, and that it helped them get through it, or that you've articulated something they can't perhaps articulate.
Absolutely.
And I see that as a huge privilege.
I do
with
too,
what
and
we
I think that's, I love that you said that, about that they've articulated, we get that privilege to maybe articulate something that they couldn't. If that's not the gift of being a writer, I don't know what is. Like that to me is just, I get teary. Those are the letters that make me teary, when someone has said, I have never been able to explain this, or I have, I just read this to my husband, this part, or I took this little bit into counseling or whatever. And I'm just like, wow, such an honor, such a privilege.
Yeah, it truly is. We're going to wrap it up very shortly. So if anyone's got any last questions that they would like to ask, please do. I'm going to pop up here Tabitha's online presence, so that if you want to catch up with her online, you can. And while we're doing that, Tabitha, can I ask you what is next for you?
Yes, there's a new one in the works. Its title is The Emporium of Imagination, and it is once again a story with some really big-hearted characters. And there's a young character in there as well. I'm a little bit obsessed with writing stories that have young characters in them, and another older character. And of course, their lives are a lovely, big, beautiful mess, and a very odd shop comes to town, and this odd shop is going to shake things up for the town and for their lives, in some positive and maybe not so positive ways. So, and that book is due out in April next year, if Tab gets her edits back on time.
Yes, well, I won't talk about that. Anyone that's been following me will know that I won't be talking about that. Caroline has a question for you. What did you do prior to writing, and what made you go into it? Because you are a fabulous storyteller, and I agree with you, Caroline, there.
Thank you, Caroline. That's lovely of you. What did I do before writing? I was a teacher, actually. I taught prep, the little guys. I taught them all around the world, Hong Kong and the US and all over the place, and I loved it. And the reason I taught the little ones is because you can use books and stories in just about everything that you do. And I never thought about being a writer. I always thought about myself as a storyteller and loved telling stories, but it wasn't until I started my own healing journey that I decided writing was something I really wanted to do. So I came to that very late in life, in my 30s, and I'm not even going to do the math to tell you how old I am. It was quite late in life. So it was just an absolute blessing that came out of my own healing journey that I discovered writing.
Mm-hmm. I don't think coming to writing late in life is a bad thing. I was in my 30s when I started writing, and I think what comes with that is a level of life experience that maybe you don't have in your teens and in your 20s, or even if it's not the experience, it's the understanding of the experience, I think, that comes with age.
Oh, absolutely. There is no way on the face of this earth that I could have written A Lifetime of Impossible Days 10 years ago. No way. It was a story that took some years under my belt in order to have on the table. And even the next story, I think, I believe things happen at the right time, and I believe writing found me, and it found me at the perfect time in my life. So I agree with you.
Christy would like to know if she can get signed copies of your book. So is there a particular way she can contact you, maybe through...
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Christine, if you want to find me on social media, on Facebook or Instagram, and
I'll just put that up for you, Christy.
And just send me a message that you'd like a signed copy. I do sign copies and I mail them out just for the cost of the book plus postage. So absolutely happy to do that for you.
Leanne is quite right in that 30s isn't late in life. No, it's not.
Okay, I agree.
There are some,
As
prodigies.
there
Are some prodigies out there in the writing world that do write in their 20s. And, there are the Fogel Award, for example, is for a writer under the age of 35.
Right.
So while it's not late in life, it's not early, I guess, either.
True. What I was meaning was I'd had a career prior.
Yeah. And Caroline agrees life experience is so important.
I also
All
had
right, we
might in there as well, so
yeah, that's right. And Bev wants to know if this is your first book.
A Lifetime of Impossible Days was my first book, yes. Currently working on the second.
And it's an absolute cracker, Bev. I saw that you commented earlier that you have to get your hands on it. I absolutely agree that you have to get your hands on it. Thank you so much for joining me today, Tabitha. Is it sunny up there in Queensland at the moment?
It is sunny, but I'm a Queensland sook, so I'm still a bit cold. But it is actually nice and sunny, and probably anyone from down south would tell me that I need to take my jumper off and stop being silly, but it's lovely up here today, yes.
And Leilani, apparently we are cracking her up with our late in life comments.
We're happy to crack up. We're here all week.
We could take this on the road maybe and crack people up. I guess for me when we're talking about late in life, we're also talking about the fact that I've not been to author talks where they talk about how they wrote their first novel when they were 7, and it was a picture book or something like that.
Yeah.
And I know that was definitely not me. I did not start writing until much later. It was never on my radar.
Or they knew they wanted to be a writer from like the age of 2 or something.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
No. All right. We've just got some goodbyes coming in. Donna has thanked us.
Thank you, Donna.
And Bev has thanked us as well. Jody, thank you for joining us, everyone, today.
Thank you.
And take care of yourselves out there in the world. Keep washing those hands. And thank you so much for joining us today, Tabitha.
Yeah, and thank you so much for having me, Sandy. It's great to chat to you again. And thanks, everyone, for joining in.
No worries. See you all later.